Our lost thoughts on Good Friday. Almighty everlasting God, who hast reared from the earth unto heaven a mighty tree, standing forever, whereon before the face of men hangeth a man, stretched and nailed, rejected and dying and alone. O thou that art true, and showest only truth, grant us to fear, not to suffer with him, die with him, and be buried with him, that we may also be made alive with him, and glorified together in the heavenly places. Jesus, who so long since set his face steadfastly towards the holy city, is reaching the climax of his journey. Love reigns, lifted above the world of men, darkness above, the trembling earth beneath. I thirst, love cries, and all the world is thirsting in that cry. I thirst for love, love cries. Give me your love, that you may share my thirst. At last the thirst is quenched. The sponge upon a spear has touched his lips and freed his voice for one last word. It is finished. The angel of death, who passed over all the firstborn of Israel in so long ago Egypt, has rested now upon the Son of God, Israel's firstborn for all time. And he who is the source of life himself has died upon the tree. The storm has shaken the city and alarmed the passers-by, and the centurion himself is left amazed and wondering as they continue their duty, waiting for the others to die. It is near to the feast, and the priests want to get everything finished and cleared away, so they ask for the legs of the men to be broken. However, when they come to Jesus, they see that he is dead already. One of the soldiers takes a spear and thrusts it into his side. The tradition handed down by John and recorded in his gospel says there came blood and water out of the side of Christ. Blood, the sign of life, and water, the greatest need of life. Here is the final place of springs, springs of life rising out of the dark stillness of death. Between this moment and the dawn of Easter is the silence of the grave. We mark that in our churches by the absence of the sacramental presence in our midst. We have an empty church, stripped of all beauty. So many places were made beautiful or bearable by the presence of Jesus. So much healing of body, mind, and soul, and the very ground where he laid his head is holy, touched with light. Now even the place where customarily he lays his body and blood is empty. The altar is bare, the candles are gone, the lights are out, and the door swings open on the empty sacramental home of Jesus. Now must we wait, for we are at that hour when all creation hushed to see the Lord of all laid in a tomb, waiting, waiting as the dark earth waits for the grain to rise within it. The disciples, waiting like the disciples for what? It seemed that they remembered nothing of his teaching. Luke tells us how he warned them. The Son of Man will be given over to unbelievers and will be mocked and maltreated and spat upon. And when they have scourged him they will put him to death. And on the third day he will rise again. Yet, who are we, knowing all our sins and foolishness, to think we should have had a clearer vision or been more faithful had we lived and walked with him? They loved and failed the test that came upon them. But as for us, with all the witness and knowledge of 2,000 years, often we do not see that if we think we do not fail, it is because we do not love with all our hearts. The love rising in us is like a wavering candle, not strong enough to be tested and blown upon, trembling in the gusts of scorn and fearful of the shadows of death. Waiting like Mary Magdalene, grieving for the love that freed from her old life, for the gentle hand and the feet she'd kissed and washed with her tears. She had no reputation to lose, she who had known both human love and human lust. The tears of lost times, lost people, lost lives, and finally a lost Lord coursed endlessly down her feet. And Mary, the mother. Mary, who had watched and pondered all her life upon her Son, so wonderfully conceived, so fine in his growing, so obedient in his youth, but always walking the same road of the vision of God. Yea, oft hath a mother bent her head over her sleeping child, and her soul hath sung Magnificat, for in her had been fulfilled all the needs of the life that came from her, when her baby woke and wanted her, and met her gaze and smiled. But the child that Mary looked upon is his whole creation's food, and the needs of nations flock to him, who alone hath understood by his own straw and twisted thorn, by his gallows trees and robe of scorn, each soul and its sweat of blood. Had she not some time between Jerusalem and Nazareth passed between the shadow of the crosses of execution? Had that shadow not brought a touch of winter to her heart? Mary, who stood and watched his dying agony, unable even to shield from the heat and flies the one whom once she had protected in her childhood. In her still figure stands a peace that undergirds all agony. He knows, therefore I trust the sword that pierces through my soul. He is not less my child within the tomb, nor less my God than he proclaimed himself to be. And John, the young son of thunder, Jesus named him, he who wanted to call down thunder and fire on the village that would not receive Jesus. John the beloved, who stirred no thoughts of jealousy in any heart, who leaned on Jesus' heart at the Last Supper in easy friendship. John, who was young, impetuous, lacking in experience, yet so full of vision that he alone of the 12 stood by the cross. John, whose youth was suddenly matured in agony for the Lord. John, to whom Jesus gave his mother, his last treasure and bequest. We wait for the sounds that break the pattern of the night, the light that slowly rises over Golgotha, an outline of 3 crosses against the rising sun, a quickening of the morning air, the hasty steps of women with spices, a sense that life has just begun. They saw young men like angels and fled. Ephobuntogar, they were afraid. Peter and John rushed to the grave, saw the grave clothes lying, unmoved, untouched. But it would Mary, Mary the Magdalene, the most forgiving and the most loving, who would see him through her tears. Come, dear heart, the fields are white to harvest. Come and see, as in a glass, the timeless mystery of love, whereby we feed on God, our bread indeed. Torn by the sickles, see him share the smart of travailing creation. Maimed, despised, yet by his lovers the more dearly prized, because for us he lays his beauty low. Last toll paid by perfection for our loss. Trace on these fields his everlasting cross, and o'er the stricken sheaves the immortal victim's crown. From far horizons came a voice that said, Lo, from the hand of death take thou thy daily bread. Then, I waking, saw a splendor in the heart of things, the flame of living love which lights the law of mystic death that works the mystic birth. I know the patient passion of the earth, maternal, everlasting, whence there springs the bread of angels and the life of men. Now in each blade I blind no longer see the glory of God's growth, know it to be an earnest of the immemorial plan. Yes, I have understood how all things are one great oblation made, he on our altars, we on this world's rood, even as this corn, earth-born, reaped, ground to grist, crushed and tormented in the mills of God, and offered at life's hand, a living Eucharist.